Hey, how's it going, everybody? My name is Lou. I'm a mastering engineer here in Los Angeles. I just want to say thank you for downloading my vocal template, and I kind of want to give you guys kind of a rundown as to how it works and the mindset behind it. Okay, so starting out, this template is so simple. Even the newest of interns at my studio can figure this out, and when I walk them through it, they're actually able to learn to actually record efficiently and organize properly very quickly, which gets them to progress through their career a lot faster. Now, as always, there's going to be a question of compatibility, and that's not really a problem. If you don't have folders in your version of Pro Tools, let's say Pro Tools 9, 10, 11, or whatever it is that you have, you don't really have to worry about it. It's just going to create an aux return instead of just a routing folder. So let's actually take a look at the template. All right, everybody, we've got the template loaded. Now, we're going to go over some of the basic routing real quick, just to kind of talk about what is going on. Now, at first, it can look intimidating. There's quite a few tracks. If we count it out, there's a total of 38 just to start. Now, it's actually not that much routing going on. If you collapse the folders down, you can see that the master is being fed by the music master and the vocal master, and within the music master, it's really just the beat track. You could import stems, you can import a 2-track, just make sure that they're routed to the music master. And on the vocal master, you'll notice that there's only 5 folders: Vox effects, lead Vox, double Vox, backing Vox, and ad-lib Vox. Okay, so I've kind of expanded the lead Vox folder just for example's sake. Now you'll notice that all of the purple tracks are actually feeding the lead Vox, but the record track is not, even though the record track is actually labeled as leads. Why is that? Because we're not trying to actually add any extra latency. Now, let's say that there was no plugins on the bus. You might assume that there shouldn't be any latency, right? But that's actually not the case. As long as you're routing anything to any bus, it's actually still adding a certain amount of processing in the path. So in order to minimize the amount of latency, it's best to actually always keep the record tracks to output 1 and 2. The coolest thing about this is that you can actually load up your playback tracks to have, let's say, a UAD A800 from Studer plugin that usually eats up a lot of CPU and causes a lot of latency, but it actually wouldn't affect your record track at all. Your record track would still have a very, very low latency that's unaffected by you adding an extra plugin. Now, if your delay compensation starts to hit in the red, you've gone too far. Even if you're in the orange, it may still be a little too far. Try to not over process on your actual recording sessions and try to just focus on getting it as good as you can, and then leave it kind of to the mixing stage to do like heavier processes. Still shape your tone, get it the way you want it, just try not to go too far. Okay, so let's talk about how these groups are set up, as most sessions don't really have groups already kind of set up, but I really like having a few features automatically working together. So one of them you'll notice is called Tune Group, and the other is called Record Link. Let's just quickly go over what those are. Okay, so to start, this might actually save a lot of people a lot of time, and I will show you how to do this right now, but the most important one I have is the tune group. So let's go to modify and just kind of see what we're doing. So you'll notice that I have tune group only as a mix type. Reason being is because I'm not really trying to change any of the editing window kind of things that we're doing. I'm not trying to add the same fade to everything. But you'll also notice that I turned off globals, and this is affecting all of the vocals. And this includes the record tracks. Now, what we're actually doing, you can see here in the attributes page, which is only affecting that they all link the controls on insert B. This is really important to know because I'm the type of person that likes to have AUTOTUNE on the second insert, so that if I need to do any kind of manual pitch correction, I may pull up AUTOTUNE Pro or Melodyne on the first insert. I don't want to have to keep moving inserts around. Also, let's say that we're actually recording a feature artist and I did not want the setting to link. I could just move the insert over one, and it would take it out of that group's control setting. If I move it back, it automatically relinks them. Now, this might sound a little weird for some people, so I'm just going to show this as an example real quick. We're going to go ahead and open 2 of them, and you'll notice if I change it on one, it changes it on the other. So if I'm recording something and I say, you know what, I feel like the AUTOTUNE was just a little too strong, I'm going to back it off a little bit. I didn't have to copy and paste that setting about 20 times, at least not at the start of the session. Sometimes you might be 100 tracks deep and finally decide, you know what, Let me check this input type. Oh crap, I forgot he's a low male vocalist. He's a baritone. Let me change that setting real quick and it'll change it over. Oh, you know what? I want to turn on classic mode on all of them, see what's happening there. I want to detune. You know, all these settings are linked. And it's so nice that you can actually just pull it up on one track and just test it out on the fly. And if you don't like it, cool, you don't have to keep that setting. But if you do like it, you don't have to copy and paste. It's so freeing of process and time. Okay, now that we've gone over the tune group, let's go over the record link group and why this is kind of useful. So once again, to see what's going on inside, you just want to right click, hit modify, and here it is, record link. It's also a mix type, but you'll see a lot more going on in the attributes page. Now you'll notice that it itself is only affecting the record tracks, not the actual playback tracks. Reason being is that the record tracks, the audio tracks themselves, are the only ones in this entire session that actually have an EQ, a de-esser, and a compressor on the actual track. The rest of them have it on their groups to minimize processing. So this is actually really important because, like I said earlier, since there's 4 record tracks, I don't want to have to make sure I copy and paste settings to them, just like I don't want to do that with the AUTOTUNE. So what I have going on is those that are in this group have inserts C, D, E controls linked, meaning that if I change the compressor settings on one record track, it's going to mirror it onto the next. Not only that, but I have sends A, B, C, D, and E all linked, which if you notice, that in itself in the session is the reverb, it's the delay, and something we'll kind of touch on the end, it's the output for the multi-cue sends. Once again, we'll touch on that later, but I have all these controls linked. So if I say, you know what, I want the de-esser to actually come to a more aggressive point, I can do that, and I don't have to copy those settings over. Now, is this being copied over to the actual bus? No. Why? Because sometimes we want the actual playback tracks to sound different than the record track. Sometimes we'll give the record track, I've seen this in sessions where we'll boost it a little bit in the mid-range so that it can push through a little more in the mix as they're recording. But on the playback track, we don't want so much mid-range going on, so we'll leave the mid-range alone. But whatever your reason is, usually you want the playback tracks to sound the way you want the final product to sound, and the record track just to kind of serve the purpose of being a record track. You still want it to sound good, but maybe you don't want the same exact settings as your playback tracks. All right, so let's talk about these record tracks that are going on. Why are there 4? It really comes down to organization and efficiency in the session. Now, there are many people who have one record track and they drag it out everywhere. And for me, that's kind of cool, but I don't want to have to be dragging the track everywhere. I kind of want to just keep it close to its grouping. And because of that, I also don't want to have all of the playlisting of the leads, the backings, the doubles, the ad-libs on the same record track. Sometimes you can go into a session and have about like 300 to 400 takes per song, maybe even more. I've done sessions where there's 400 takes just on the lead vocal, and say what you will about that, but that's a reality. And I'm not trying to overcomplicate what's going on in the playlist and seeing all that and then trying to be like, wait, what's a backing, what's a lead? And it's just adding chaos at the end of the session. So what I've done is I created the 4 for lead, doubles, backings, ad-libs, and we're just going to go ahead and kind of see if I was recording here. Great. Now, let's say that they like that. I'm just going to copy that down. I'm going to playlist it and say, cool, let's record a double to that. I can just skip over. Bam. We've now recorded our double. Great. They like that too. All right, cool. No worries. Now let's actually record a backing vocal to that. Okay, great. Now that we've got that, we can kind of move on. And it was that quick and easy to just kind of do it. And that's doing it lazily right now. If we were in the middle of a session, best believe we'd be moving very quickly. Now, things you want to make sure that you do with these record tracks is it's okay to just kind of hit the record button and then hit recording, because realistically, they're still going to be able to hear themselves when you're in stop and when you're recording, but they won't be able to hear themselves if you're just playing back. So you have to make sure that you hit the input arm button. Now, you can hit this after recording. It wouldn't affect you. It wouldn't cause a pop or a click. It would just make sure that when you hit stop or when you're just playing back, you could still hear them. Now, the input arm, you don't have to worry about disarming that every time you switch tracks. it's automatically linked. So you can, once again, just focus on recording and do that. Just make sure you're playlisting on those record tracks, because if you move on to the next track and you haven't actually playlisted the take you had in front of you there, it's going to play back. So just make sure you playlist it, delete it, do what you want. I personally like to playlist everything, but once again, it's just making sure you don't have doubles going on. Now, just to kind of quickly go over this, I know we talked about if it's necessary to use these settings, and kind of like, are they even good settings? You know, I guess that's everybody's question. The reality is you don't have to use my settings. In fact, you don't even have to use my plugins. I designed this template to be effective, to be fast, and to work everywhere I go. Because one of the number one issues that you see in a lot of, I guess, session templates is that they want you to be able to, you know, get this specific sound. The Travis Scott template, the Kanye template, the Pharrell template, and that's cool. But not always are you going to go to a studio that has those same plugins. And that is where the issue exists. When you're reliant on specific plugins to be able to get a good recording, or at least close enough, then you're very reliant on your own setup, and that's totally okay. But as a traveling engineer and doing kind of what I do, where if your goal is to work with many artists, if your goal is to become somebody's personal engineer, you have to realize that you're going to travel to different studios, and that's totally okay. You might actually try a new plugin that you really like, and it's just not available there. That's okay. It's going to happen. But just make sure that whatever it is that you do load into the session is compatible just about anywhere, or you can do without it for a session or two if you have to. But that's the only issue I've really seen with some of these like templates that are online. It's just that compatibility becomes a major issue. Now, the cool thing is that many of them will let you know what plugins they're using in advance before you buy it, so that you can make sure that when you're buying it, you're also not buying a template that's not compatible with your own setup. So I wanted to give everybody something that I honestly do use every day. And yes, it does use stock plugins. And no, there's no settings dialed in outside of a touch of reverb and delay, because that's usually our starting point. And that's how you should see a template. A template isn't an end-all be-all solution. It's a starting point. So let's kind of look at some of the rest of the features of this template. Okay, so one of the last things that I want to go over before we go over like some tips and tricks of how to use this template is just the actual flow of sound through it, the actual routing. Okay, let's talk about a little bit of the vocals routing so that we can kind of see what's going on. Now, as I mentioned before, the record track is actually routed to output 1 and 2. It's not going through the buses or the folders. Now, let's take a look at Pro Tools, and this is what it's looking like. Okay, so check this out. We've recorded this vocal. It's supposed to be dropped down, but how is the signal actually being routed through the template? Like, what is going where? Check this out. So typically speaking, I actually like to duplicate the track and playlist it in case I accidentally delete it. I can always go back. But once again, taking this track down, playlisting this, making sure we're good. If you actually hit play on it, you can actually see where the signal is going, which is pretty simple. As you can imagine, the lead vocal tracks are feeding the lead vox folder, doubles to doubles, backing to backing, ad-lib to ad-lib. Now, on each one of these buses, you'll notice that the leads and the backings and everything all have sends to verbs and delays. Now, the leads go to verb 1 and delay 1. The doubles, backing, and ad-libs go to verb 2 and delay 2. Why? Because I like to process them separately. But the Vox effects and the rest of the Vox folders all feed the vocal master. So playing that back just so you can kind of see it.
Baby, I know what you
Here it
did.
is.
Can't turn
Lead
back.
Vox vocal
Can't
is
forgive.
feeding
Too much
the
shade,
lead
too
vocal
much
Vox,
regret.
and that's also sending signal over to the effects because of the bus sends. That's feeding the vocal master, right? And that is feeding the actual master. Now, it's kind of funny because a lot of times when you're recording, it may look a little weird meter-wise when you're looking at the buses or something, because realistically, once again, it's coming out 1 and 2. So just don't overthink this process, because that's just doing its own thing. Okay, so just kind of looking at the music routing now, it's actually really simple because there's no effects buses or anything going on. Most times you're going to be dealing with the 2-track when dealing with, I guess, importing tracks, or sometimes you get a stem or stems to the original beat if the artist wants to provide you with that right away. Most times not, but either way, in the case that you do, let's go through the import process real quick. Command-Shift-I. We're going to go ahead and click on our beat or whatever it is. I'm going to click convert or copy all the time because I want to make sure that the file gets copied into my session folder. Now, you could do clip list. I usually do new track because I want to know where it is. And bam, there it is. Now, you'll notice upon importing the actual track, it's right now going to output 1 and 2. But we want it to actually go through the music bus, right? Music master. Now, you could just route this one on the actual track, but you see, we kind of had to go through a process of doing that. It's much easier that, like, when you actually import it, you could just do this. Just drag it up to the actual beat track, and voila, you're done. So don't overcomplicate it, and we'll just kind of move on from here and take a look at some tips as far as getting the session started and going. Okay, so let's check this out. I want to kind of show you guys some tips and tricks as far as securing a good overall session. And sometimes they're as simple as making sure that you have session file backups. Like, let's say Pro Tools were to crash. You want to make sure you have a backup, right? Well, here's a fun fact. The default setting in Pro Tools when it's installed is not consistent enough and does not have enough duplicates for me to ever feel safe. So let me show you what I'm actually talking about and how to actually change that. Okay, so to actually find this in Pro Tools, you go to Setup, Preferences, you go to Operations tab, and you look over here on the kind of like lower middle left, Auto Backup. Make sure that that's enabled. I like to set mine to 999 copies every 1 minute. Well, not 999 every 1 minute, but it does a backup every 1 minute. Now, the reason this is important is, let me give you an example. Let's say that you're working with somebody like Tristan Rice, somebody who knows how to stack vocals like a god. Like, that dude is making full harmony stacks in less than 5 minutes. Pro Tools by default has these settings at keep every 10 and backup every 5 minutes. Now, a lot can happen in those 5 minutes. Like I just said, what if Pro Tools crashed and it hasn't saved in 5 minutes? You might have lost an entire stack of vocals, and you definitely don't want to make somebody angry by saying like, hey, we lost the entire harmony stack we just recorded. Like, do you remember it? Can you re-record it? They may not remember it. So it's best, if you really care about these sessions and if you really want to make sure your client has a good time, even in the event of a computer failure or anything, make sure it's backing up every 1 minute and let it gobble up your memory. Worst case scenario on a massive session, it's going to eat up 3 gigs. Like, 1 terabyte now costs you $50 at the store. It's not really a valid excuse to say it's too expensive to do it anymore. All right, here's one of my favorite tips, because I've actually seen people fired over this. Keep every take, playlist it, in other words. Now, the reason this is very important is because, like, yes, it's going to eat up more memory, but I've worked with vocalists who will record a lead line, let's say 7 times, and be like, you know what? I like the 3rd take better. They didn't tell you to save it. They just said, I like the 3rd take better. And if you don't have it, well, guess what? Your ass is in the hot seat now. Like, it's pretty simple. Like, if you don't know how to actually do it, it's honestly just Control /, and let me show you in Pro Tools real quick what that looks like when actually doing it. So let's say we're here, we recorded something. Oh, I don't have an input, but let's say that we recorded something, we liked it, cool. I can playlist it, and they're like, let me just get another one, record another pass, record, playlist it. Awesome. And all I'm doing is Control / and saying yes to the name change. Let's say that they're like, oh, you know what? I like the take from take 3. Okay, great. You can do Shift up and down to actually cycle through the actual playlist. So they say, I like take 3. Great. You're at take 3. If you want an easier way to see all of them, say like, how many takes do we have? Instead of cycling through with Shift, you can just click over here on playlist, and voila, it'll actually show you how many times you've playlisted. And every time you add one, the list increases. So it's really easy to actually save and organize. Let's say that you like this section of this take and they're asking you to comp it. It's actually really fast. You just highlight the section, hit the little arrow, and bam, there's your comp. there's not a valid excuse as to why you can't be playlisting outside of I don't have enough memory or I'm looking to get fired. So just playlist everything that you can. I've literally seen good people kicked out of the chair, and we're talking about like people who's got, you know, multi-platinum plaques and they've got different kinds of awards, and they're still getting fired because they didn't know the basic rule, which is don't delete the take. Okay, so let's talk about the grid mode that I like to use the most, which is relative grid. It's actually pretty snappy and fast for what I need it to be. Now, let's say that we weren't in relative grid mode. Let me show you what happens, because there's something special about relative grid, which is that it doesn't snap on the one. So if we're in regular grid mode, which you can change over here on the top left, I believe it's escape. Nope. Tilde. That you can switch modes in. Now, you can't hit relative grid mode if you're already in grid mode with tilde. You just have to click on grid and swap. Now, what regular grid would do is, let's say that we're here just going on full bar on the grid. If I drag this to the right, it'll just snap it to the next bar. It won't actually keep its positioning relative to where it lines in the grid. So relative grid keeps it where it's at, but it'll just be in bar increments if that's what we've kind of set over here on our grid value. Let's say we did quarters, it'll do it in quarters, but you'll notice it doesn't actually snap it to the one. It actually keeps it in place. Now, if you're the type of person that doesn't like to work in grid because they want to slip around like in slip mode, which is honestly very convenient if you're doing like nudges, but to be honest, let's say that we're in relative grid, you could just hold command and it's going to slip around anyways. So the relative grid just makes it easy. So if you have to copy verses and you're somewhere in between these bar grids, you could actually just, you know, let's say we need to copy things over. You can just hold Option and it'll keep those copies in its relative position depending on where you want it to go. Let's say that you're actually, you know, doing some edits like this where we kind of cut and end and we want to pull it back and you want to be very specific about it. You can, like I said, hold command and it'll be in slip mode for the moment. So relative grid works really well when in a busy session, just so you're not trying to match the timing by trying to over highlight and all that kind of stuff, because you could do that and that's true, but it's much easier for me to just grab this and swing it and just keep it in its relative position if you're in relative grid mode. Okay, 2 features that you should always have on is going to be your tap to transient, and what is this one? A link timeline and edit selection. Now, the reason for the 2 is this, starting off with tap to transient. Let's say that I just want to actually edit some of the transients and I don't want to have to be clicking and zooming and then trying to line up the cursor. You could just kind of click near it, hit tab, and bam, you're at the transient. Now, let's say that you wanted to go backwards. Instead of hitting tab or like shift tab or any other combination, you could just hit L. If you were to hit shift tab, all you're really doing is highlighting up until the next transient. But this is really useful when you're editing like kicks or T's and P's in a vocal where maybe there's like a hard breath or something and you're just trying to bring it down. You could just tab over to it and say, cool, I'm going to highlight that by holding shift tab, or you know what? I went too far. You hit L and it'll bring you back. Now, as far as doing the link timeline to, what is it? Edit selection, it's because if I tab over here, I actually want to hear what's over there. Okay, so one of my favorite features in Pro Tools' most recent updates, I'm not sure which version brought it in, but layered editing. A common issue that you'll see in some sessions is the engineer's moving fast, and so because of that, when he's dragging down the track, he accidentally drags it onto the wrong one. Now, normally back in the day, if that happened and you moved it away, it would just show an empty section because it essentially deleted the last part. But the cool thing is you can move this back onto the track it's supposed to be, and you'll notice that this came back. In the past, it would act as if this happened, which was not great, and some people would freak out because they're like, oh crap, I think I lost the take, and they would hit undo in the middle of recording, and sometimes that can cause other issues. But layered editing will actually save your ass, because if I turn that off and work like I used to, if I did that and then moved it away, you see, it deleted the take. Definitely don't want to be that person. A really helpful tip that I got for you is knowing about like starting at the top of the clip or at the end of the clip by just using your arrows up and down. Now, to give you this example, like let's say that I'm actually recording somebody and we're doing line for line kind of recording. I could hit numeric pad 3 to record, or command space, whatever people like. Now let's say we got a section that they like. All right, cool. They like this part here. I'm going to go ahead and highlight that, break it, drag it down, hit down, record again. I'm a playlist, and bam, we're on to recording the next line. Let's say that they like this take 2. Cool. I'm just going to take the section that I need. I'm going to copy it down on playlist and record. But you see how I didn't hit up or down? Let's say that I would have let it record like that. It's just going to stop it right at the end of it. And they were trying to punch in for that section. You just threw them off their groove. So you want to make sure that when you're actually doing it, record them. Cool. Get the section, highlight it, go here, hit down to start at the top of the clip so they can hear back what they just recorded and move on to the next line. Now, let's say that they're done recording what they liked and everything, and they just want to move on to the next section and take a listen to it. You can hit up to start at the end of that clip, and voila. You know, you can use numeric pad 1 to go back, numeric pad 2 to go, forward. You can also use P and I want to say ampersand to go down. I'll be 100% honest, whatever is below P. But yeah, these are just simple little shortcuts that seem kind of minuscule at first, but they actually help you get really fast at recording. All right, so I don't know how many of you have had to deal with this, which is making the mistake of when somebody says, oh, I like what I just did. Let me hear it back. And so you just hit play, right? We got Pro Tools playing, they're hearing it, they're loving it, and suddenly they start finding melodies that they like because they're like, I'm feeling inspired to write an ad-lib track right now. But you didn't actually hit record. No worries. Just hit record at some point while it's playing, and guess what? You can actually drag it back. You didn't lose the take. Don't worry about it. Just make sure that you hit record while it's playing. Now, let's say that you were just trying to punch in a section and they did something really cool at the end of it, but it's not within the range. No worries. Even in pre-roll and post-roll kind of workflows, if it recorded in punch mode, even with the post-roll going on, you can still even drag backwards as long as it was still playing at that section. So once again, keep yourself in punch mode while tracking with people. It'll just make sure that you didn't lose anything. Okay, so for this tip, honestly, it's more just of a compass kind of style tip, which is don't overthink it. Honestly speaking, there's not a lot of flashy plugins for a reason. Number one being that they're not always going to be compatible everywhere you go, because not everybody has Waves or Fab Filter or everybody's got AUTOTUNE nowadays, but still, even then, you don't know if the person that studio you're booking out has Waves tune. You know what I mean? Like, whatever the situation is, this session has to stay compatible, whether you're jumping from one room to the other or not. Now, in the event that you want to add more plugins, you can, but just don't overthink the process. Just try to go with your gut and try to listen for the right sound from the source. If you think that your recordings are a little dark, chances are you might need a brighter microphone. Maybe your vocal tone itself or the artist's vocal tone is just naturally dark. If there's a lot of S's going on, try using a mic that is not as receptive to sibilance. You know, there's always ways to kind of move around it. Now, not everybody has a lot of gear, and that's okay too. The idea is just to not worry about what plugins there are, but rather how to get the job done without overcomplicating what is in front of you. Honestly speaking, this is probably the most helpful one for both producers, recording engineers. But if you're an artist and you don't know how to tell like what key you're in or anything, and you have to record yourself, this is going to be especially helpful for you, because that's okay. Like, not everybody knows how to actually tell what key they're in. That's something that some people learn, and some people can do by ear or by piano. If they have like a little extra piano laying around, they could kind of figure it out from there. I'm not one of those people. So check this out. This is what I do. Let's say I have a song. In this case, I'm going to use a friend's track. He did a cover of Thriller, and I don't know what the BPM or the key of the track is. So I'm going to go ahead and drag it into what's called mixed in key. I have mixed in key 8. I know that there's some new updates, but essentially this will help you find out what the actual tempo of the track is and what the actual key is. Now, as it's processing, it's going to take a little bit, but check this out. It's 90 BPM and it's D flat minor. Now I can actually go into Pro Tools and just say, cool, the track is in D flat minor. Bam. So we'll go C sharp minor. And it's at 90 BPM. And done. Voila. I'm ready and set up for my session. So mixed in key, it actually helps out a lot. And not just that, if you check this out, in the actual file archive, it actually added the key and the tempo to the actual track name. So when you're sending out beats for people to consider, like, oh, do you want to write to this and that, producers, do this. Just before you send it out, just drag it in. You know, it'll let people know what the tempo and the key is. You don't have to write it down yourself. Just drop it in. Engineers, before you actually import it into the session, just drag it in and let it do its job so you know what the key and the tempo is, so you don't have to be asking the producer or the artist, and you can quickly get to work. And artists, if you have to do all this yourself, you know, it's just another additive tool that's going to make your life easier. Okay, so my last tip for y'all is what I said we'd touch on later. It's the multi-cue outputs that I have set up on the record track, on the vocal master, the music master, and on the click track. Now, what these are for is sometimes you're working with groups who will, let's say, they all want to hear something different. Now, that's totally okay. Sometimes you're actually working with a group that has like 2 vocalists singing at the same time, and each one of them is going to want their own cue mix. Cue mixes being what they hear in their headphones. They don't want to hear what you hear. They just want more of themselves and maybe less of the other person. But if you had to give them the same mix, that's not really fair or comfortable for the other person, right? So to kind of accommodate for these things, I did it on a very basic level in this template, because this is actually how I do monitoring for cues in my studio, which is the music comes out of output 9 and 10, which feeds the multi-cue system, channel 1 and 2. The vocal master comes in out of 11 and 12 on my system, which feeds my 3 and 4 on my multi-cue. So that means we have music playback on the first stereo pair and vocal playback on the second stereo pair. And the record mic is actually coming in on the third stereo pair, which is really helpful, because sometimes they say, can I get a little more of me? And they can just turn themselves up on their own multi-cue system. Now, not everybody wants a click track, but for those who do, I also have on the fourth stereo pair the click track. Now, everybody can assume their own outputs and their own routing for any of this, and some people aren't really ever going to need that, so that's totally okay. If you have a setup like mine where your monitor controller has a button where it says the artist is listening to whatever you listen to, then these things won't even affect them. But if you have a multi-cue system like I do, you could just select whatever outputs are associated to whatever, you know, channels on your cue system and work from there. But the whole idea, once again, of this is not that it's always necessary. It's just that if you work with a lot of people who have very specific preferences for their cues, just give them some outputs or give them their own custom mix, because you can always make all of these a pre-fader sound of whatever singular pair output and just feed their headphones from that output, you know. But overall, this is just more of in case you need it. Once again, it wasn't really important for the template, but it's something that I use every day, so I left it in the template. But outside of that, multi-cues, if you ever want to try them out, I highly suggest it. So that just about wraps it. Now, if you guys need any help with any of the information that we kind of went over, so you know, you can always reach me on Instagram at masteredbylu, or any of the other platforms. You can find me under the same name. Now, you can also just send me an email or go to my website. Check this out. If you go to my website, you'll be able to find my vocal template if you don't already have it. You can see what services I offer in case you want to get some mixing or mastering, or even set up, like I said, a one-on-one lesson. If you need some extra help, if you need a free consultation, you can book it out, and it's as simple as just clicking, saying what time zone you're in, say the date you're looking for, what time, continue, and just go through the process. So once again, Thank you for downloading the vocal template. If you need any help, just reach out directly. But outside of that, I really hope this video has simplified a lot of the template for you.